They say funerals reveal more about the living than the dead, and that day, they were absolutely right. She walked in like she owned the place. Olivia, the stranger in crimson heels who didn't cry, didn't bow her head, didn't flinch when they lowered my husband's coffin into the earth. She smiled like grief was a party, and she'd just been handed an invitation. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know her story. But I knew a predator when I saw one. And that woman came to collect. If this first taste of betrayal got your pulse rising, like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss a single twist of this cold, calculated revenge. Let's give every backstabber the ending they deserve. I'd been Harold Harwood's wife for 42 years. I buried his parents. I cooked his meals, folded his regrets, and stayed when he came home drunk, smelling like smoke and someone else's perfume. I forgave him once, maybe twice, but never for the right reasons. Habit has a way of turning into loyalty when you've given too much of yourself to turn back. But that day, when I saw her, habit died. The will reading was held in Mr. Gordon's office, just 4 days after the burial. The curtains were drawn, and the smell of his old cherry pipe still clung to the air. Harold had insisted we use Gordon for all our estate matters, and I, like I always did, agreed. It was a room for closure, or so I thought. Instead, it became the birthplace of my rebirth. Olivia sat across from me. Tight black dress. That smug, lipstick-red mouth. She didn't acknowledge me with a nod or a glance. Why would she? In her mind, she'd already won. She crossed her legs like a woman settling into power. Mr. Gordon cleared his throat, shuffled the legal papers, and began. To my daughter, Olivia Claire Harwood. That was the moment. The sentence that split my world in half. A daughter. Harold had a daughter. And not a daughter I knew. Not a child we buried or one I held or named or wept for. This was someone else's child. Someone he'd kept hidden. And he'd left her everything. I leave the Harwood estate, all financial accounts, properties, and assets, excluding only my 1974 Omega timepiece, which I leave to my wife, Margaret Ruth Harwood. A watch. A goddamned wristwatch. After 4 decades of sacrifice, of swallowing rage, of surviving in silence, I was worth a dusty old heirloom on his wrist and a line in his will. No house. No money. No recognition. Just a token. As if I were a relic to be boxed and stored beside him in his grave. But I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. Because right then, in that moment of quiet annihilation, something inside me calcified. The version of me that stayed, that endured, that served, she died. And something else rose in her place. Something colder. Smarter. Hungrier. He thought he could erase me with ink and paper. He thought a signature would silence 4 decades of devotion. But Harold forgot one thing. I was never just his wife. I was the woman who helped build his empire. And I was about to burn it down, brick by deceitful brick. Grief wears many disguises. Mine chose a wool cardigan, cracked knuckles, and a checklist of things no widow should have to do alone. But even grief couldn't mask what the house now reeked of. Betrayal. It lingered in the cushions, hid behind picture frames, whispered through the vents like smoke from a slow-burning fire. The kitchen where I'd made Harold's breakfast for 42 years felt foreign now. Like someone else had been living beside me, watching me through the eyes of a lie. I didn't eat that morning. I opened drawers, touched papers, ran my fingers along spines of books Harold never read, and I waited for something to show itself. It didn't take long. In the back of his study, his sanctum, where even dust obeyed, there was a safe I'd only seen him use twice in my life. I knew the code. Harold was clever but predictable. 0923. Our wedding anniversary. The irony made me chuckle. Inside were documents. Passports, 2 of them. One American, one Canadian. Both his face. Different names. Different birthplaces. There were hotel receipts, love notes written on napkins, a lease for an apartment in Philadelphia, and an insurance policy listing Olivia Claire Harwood as sole beneficiary. It was all there. His second life, neatly categorized, waiting for me like it wanted to be found. I didn't cry. I made copies. Neatly. Quietly. Like a librarian assembling an archive for a crime scene. There's a rhythm to revenge, and I was just learning the music. By noon, I was at the UPS store, faxing documents to a man I hadn't spoken to in 14 years, Daniel Polk, my brightest former student. He was an awkward kid when I taught him English literature. Now he was a shark with a law degree and a reputation for winning ugly. When I called him, I didn't explain everything. Just told him Harold's will wasn't right. That I needed help. That I didn't want pity. I wanted strategy. He responded with one sentence. Margaret, if he's left you out, that means you've got all the leverage. Daniel arrived at sunset. His eyes scanned my kitchen like he was stepping onto a battlefield. And he was. I showed him everything. Every document, every bank printout, every signature, every silent insult. And he smiled. You know, he said, pouring the tea I made without asking. In my experience, the women who get screwed over in wills are usually the ones who've done the most work. But lucky for you, your husband was arrogant. I narrowed my eyes. And what does arrogance buy me? He tapped the original will, signed in 1993, which named me sole heir unless we had children. Which we didn't. At least, I didn't. He grinned. Arrogance buys you an opening. Because what Harold forgot, what Olivia clearly didn't know, is that you can't amend a will to benefit a secret child unless you disclose everything. And Harold, in his paranoia, had hidden her existence from even his lawyer. You're telling me, I whispered, I can challenge her claim? Daniel leaned back in the chair. No, Margaret. I'm telling you we're going to take everything back. Legally. Publicly. And she's going to walk away with nothing. You ever wonder what happens when a widow with nothing left to lose starts digging? Stay close. The lies are deeper than you think. And so is my resolve. There's a silence that settles in the soul when your identity is ripped away. An echoing calm that follows rage. It's the space where decisions are born. Cold, surgical, deliberate decisions. The kind that take shape not in moments of fury, but in long nights lit by desk lamps and hard truths. That's where I lived in the days that followed, the quiet before the reckoning. Daniel became my shadow. He arrived every morning in his gray suit, sleeves rolled, eyes sharper than broken glass. For a man who once struggled with poetry, he had become quite fluent in the language of vengeance. And I was his willing muse. We began by assembling the case. We needed to prove two things: that Harold had committed fraud in concealing a second heir, and that the most recent will was executed under conditions that violated estate law, namely, the concealment of a beneficiary and misrepresentation of marital assets. What made it easier, almost too easy, was Harold's arrogance. His secrecy had been pathological. He never disclosed Olivia's existence to anyone, not even Mr. Gordon. She was not listed in any family documents, no trust, no guardianship, no acknowledgement in the original will from 1993. That meant one thing. She had no legal standing to contest anything. Unless, of course, Harold had formally recognized her and updated all his documents, which he hadn't. Daniel's voice was calm as we reviewed the materials. This is a blueprint for self-destruction. And he gave it to you wrapped in a safe. He smiled faintly. Most widows weep. You build war rooms. I simply poured more tea. But we needed more than documents. We needed a pressure point. Something to force Olivia into court. Something to ensure that her claim on the estate would be invalidated in a way so public, so irreversible, it would bury any chance of recovery. So we filed a formal petition with probate court. Quietly. No headlines. No noise. Not yet. Then we did something unexpected. We invited Olivia to lunch. She accepted immediately, assuming, like her father, I was weak. That I had come to negotiate. That I was ready to beg. She showed up at Le Jardin, a bistro Harold once loved, wearing sunglasses too large for her thin face and a purse that probably cost more than my entire kitchen. She ordered champagne. I ordered still water. Then I slid the file across the table. The passports. The lease. The financial disclosures. A copy of the old will. The affidavit Daniel had drafted. Her smirk faltered. "What is this?" she asked. "Evidence," I said. "And the beginning of the end." She tried to play coy. Claimed she was Harold's biological daughter, entitled to what was hers. Claimed he wanted her to have a chance. That he loved her. I didn't flinch. "Tell me, Olivia. Did Harold ever introduce you to anyone as his daughter? Did he ever name you on a public record, acknowledge you to a lawyer, register your name on his accounts?" She blinked. "No. That's unfortunate. Because in the eyes of the law, you don't exist." Daniel slid the letter of intent across the table. "You'll sign this," he said, "releasing all claims to the estate in exchange for a settlement of $10,000. If you don't, we go to court where we will prove fraud, have the amended will revoked, and file a civil suit for damages against your name. Publicly." Her hands trembled. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. And I answered gently. "Because I gave that man 42 years. I earned every inch of that house, every dollar in those accounts. You think you're owed something because he gave you his name. But I gave him my life. And I am taking it back." She signed. Of course she did. He tried to erase me. She tried to replace me. But neither of them knew who I really was. Stay close. The reckoning isn't over. Next, I bury his legacy and build my own. Some women collapse under betrayal. Others become angels of vengeance, gliding over the ruins of what was with the dignity of someone who's already seen hell and refused to stay. By the time Olivia walked out of that bistro with trembling hands and a shattered inheritance, I had already begun preparing the funeral Harold truly deserved, the burial of his legacy. Daniel and I didn't just win. We dismantled the mythology Harold had built over decades. His empire had been woven together with charisma and secrets, but the truth is always hungrier. We filed for an official revocation of the contested will and provided evidence of fraudulent concealment, supported by notarized bank statements, undeclared offshore holdings, and notarized testimonies from two of Harold's former colleagues who had known Howard Clay, his alias. One of them even admitted Harold had introduced Olivia as an old friend's daughter. Meanwhile, Daniel leaked the right parts of the story to the right people. Not the tabloids. Harold had always avoided the press. But the investors, the board members, the charitable foundations bearing his name. Within a month, 2 contracts were pulled from his firm. Within 2 months, his company stock dipped 10%. But I wasn't done. I made my next move not out of vengeance, but legacy. I restructured Harold's estate, legally now mine again. Sold the vacation home he always kept for himself. Donated it to a battered women's shelter in the name of my stillborn daughter. I pulled his name from the scholarship fund and replaced it with hers. The woman he betrayed and the child we lost, now carved into every dollar given to someone who still believed in something. People noticed. They started whispering. Not about Harold. About me. The silent wife, the background figure, the grieving old woman. She was gone. In her place stood someone sharper, steadier. A woman who could ruin a person with a manila folder and a quiet smile. Olivia left the state. I heard she tried to sue Daniel for coercion. She failed, of course. Her inheritance was gone, her name tarnished. Turns out, when you try to play heiress to a kingdom built on secrets, and the queen returns from exile, you lose. As for Mr. Gordon, Harold's old lawyer, he called me 3 months later. Wanted to apologize. Said he never suspected. I told him not to feel guilty. Men like Harold choose weak shadows to surround themselves. They never expect the shadow to grow teeth. My husband thought death would free him from the consequences of his sins. He forgot I was still alive. And now his name is gone. But mine? Mine is just beginning to echo. I used to think revenge would look like fire. something loud, red, engulfing. But it turns out it's more like a garden blooming in winter. Quiet. Precise. Alive in places no one thought life could survive. That's what I became after it all. Not a woman scorched by betrayal, but one who had planted herself in ashes and grown something new. The house no longer echoed with the sounds of Harold's footsteps or his half-hearted apologies. I sold the piano he never played, burned the old suits he wore for appearances, and kept only what had meaning. The photo of our wedding day, a lie but a beautiful one, and the watch he left me. Not because it was a gift, but because it was proof. Proof of what little he thought I was worth, and what little he truly understood about me. Daniel and I remained in touch, but not just as lawyer and client. We met every Thursday for lunch, talked about literature, the absurdity of estate law, and the nature of power. One afternoon he asked me, "Did you ever love him, Harold?" I stirred my tea. I loved who I thought he was. Then I mourned that man. Then I buried the real one. And that was the truth. The settlement from the restructured estate was enough to do anything I wanted, but I didn't move to the coast or buy a villa in Italy. I bought a building. An old, rusted library in a forgotten corner of town, the same place I once taught in my early years. I turned it into a community center, named it the Ruth House after my mother. Inside its walls, women gathered. Some fled homes like mine. Some were rebuilding. All of them carried stories, and I listened. I gave lectures on poetry, on quiet strength, on rebuilding without apology. People started calling me Ms. Harwood again. But now they said it with respect, sometimes with fear, always with a little awe. As for Olivia, she faded like all false storms do. I never heard from her again. And I didn't care to, because she was never the real enemy. She was just another lie Harold told, dressed in blood and entitlement. The true betrayal was his. And the justice? That belonged to me. I visit Harold's grave once a year. Not out of love. Not even hate. Just finality. I place no flowers. Only the copy of the revoked will, folded and yellowing, pressed into the soil with my gloved hand. You taught me silence. I whisper every time. And I used it to become the woman you feared most. Thank you for walking through this journey of betrayal, revenge, and rebirth with me. If this story moved you, share it, subscribe for more powerful true life-inspired tales, and like this post to help others find their voice in silence. Because somewhere out there, another forgotten woman is preparing to bloom. Rose.